This is Dan Rogers, your host on We the People Town Square, coming to you from the center of the universe, the high plains of Texas, near the headwaters of the Prairie Dog Town Fork of the Red River. Today is February the 1st of 2024. Today we are here with David Schenck, who's running for the presiding judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals. David, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's kind of you to have me.
Let's tell these primary voters that make up the Republican Party why you're running for the presiding judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals.
Well, I'm running because the court is critically important to the state. Too few people have been paying attention to their elected officials generally and to their courts in particular. And I think people have seen in Texas and around the country just how important judges are, and the idea that people are going to appear before judges, whether it's a president or a regular citizen, they need a judge that's going to be fair, honest, and competent. And there are serious challenges going on in Texas and across the country right now. And the Court of Criminal Appeals is the highest court in the state for all criminal matters. We in Oklahoma are the only states that have divided our Supreme Courts into two parts, one criminal, one civil. And the Court of Criminal Appeals has been taking a turn to the left for several years now. And there's challenges on that court. A lot of people are very concerned about this decision in a case called Stevens that has managed at a minimum to shake people's confidence, not just in our elections, but in our judiciary. And I've been involved in issues relating to fairness in elections, the judiciary, and served as our Deputy Attorney General for Texas. And I really am concerned about bringing back people's confidence in our judges and our judiciary.
So let's explain to the voters what was the Stevens case.
The Stevens case presented a really basic question. The legislature back in 1951 passed a law, if I'm remembering correctly, that allowed the Attorney General to prosecute people for election fraud. These elections, by their nature, affect not just local issues, but statewide issues and presidential elections across the country, obviously. So the state has an interest in making sure that the count is valid. And when people commit fraud locally, obviously it affects the entire state. So the legislature passed that law. The governor signed it into effect. The Constitution allows, by its plain terms, the legislature to add to the Attorney General's authority. And I don't want to go too far here because I need to make sure that I don't get in a position where I can't rule on a case if it comes before me on the Court of Criminal Appeals. But I will say it is an extremely important issue about whether we can prosecute people for fraud. Well, that statute sat on the books for 60 years. The Court of Criminal Appeals in the Stevens case reversed itself, having said previously that the legislature has that power, and they took all that power into the judiciary and said, only the local DAs who report to us and operate under us can decide whether or not we're going to prosecute somebody for election fraud. And I'll tell you a little story. I also, as by coincidence, served as chairman of the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. That's the body created by the Texas Constitution to look after all of our judges everywhere in the state to make sure they're behaving the way that we would expect them to. While I was there, we had a case involving a judge in Texas who was found to have a lot of absentee ballots that he couldn't explain. He had been indicted by Ken Paxton, and his answer was not that I didn't have the ballots, not that I wasn't properly indicted for election fraud, but the wrong person indicted me. I had to give him his robe back, and he's back on the bench today doing whatever he was doing before. I think that people need to be confident in their government, and the question of whether we can trust our elections, we can trust our judges, above all else, has to be answered with an emphatic yes. Now, I'm not saying how I would decide that case if it were to come back to the court. I'm just telling you how critical it is to have people in these positions who understand the law, who will read the Constitution the way it was written, and won't surprise us with decisions like this that people look at and they scratch their heads and they say, what's going on here?
So the Stevens case basically took the ability of the Attorney General from being able to prosecute fraud cases in elections and threw it back to the DAs, which aren't going to prosecute them because they think it's not relevant.
Well, I'll ask you this question, and I'm gonna I'll be direct about it. Do you remember the Dukes of Hazzard?
Yeah.
Remember Cletus?
Yeah.
Remember Boss Hogg?
Yeah.
If you put Cletus in charge of investigating Boss Hogg, we pretty much know what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah.
The local DAs are elected on the same ballot that's the subject of the fraud. I sat as an appellate judge for 8 years on the largest court in the state. I've seen these issues before. As I said, I chaired the Conduct Commission before. And just by way of analogy, if we have a fight in any county in the state over who won an election, whether it's for sheriff or it's for a county commissioner seat or anything else like that, the law does not permit any of the judges in that county to sit on that case because they're elected on the same ballot. It would look horrible to have a judge whose party is prevailing on the ballot then sit over a challenge to the winner who was elected on the same ballot. We have to, as a matter of law, look someplace else. As a result of this decision, we've turned that upside down with respect to who's going to decide whether there is fraud or not to be investigated. And then if there is some, are we even going to try to prosecute it? That's a serious, serious decision. There was a dissent in that case. One of the judges involved flipped back and forth. That judge is on the ballot right now as well. I'm going to stay in my own race, but this court, it's not just on election fraud. It's on other issues. It struck down the Open Meetings Act, where people are supposed to be confident that their business is being done out in public. It struck down a statute that required that court and others to just inform the Attorney General on behalf of the state before they decide to strike down a state statute. So in other words, if they're looking at the obscenity law, for instance, and whether it's constitutional or not, there was a state law that said, just raise your hand and let the Attorney General come in and defend the constitutionality of the statute so we can have an opportunity to be heard. The state itself, the court on its own initiative said, no, go pound sand. We don't need to give you an invitation to be heard before we strike down your statutes. That is activism of the worst sort, in my view, and it perverts the concept of separation of powers. We don't have a royal judiciary. And the courts, as I believe, has lost its way. It's not doing its work. We can get onto that topic later. But the idea that the judiciary is supposed to be the least dangerous branch, it's not active. It's passive. It's modest. It doesn't go out and surprise the people with the decisions in ways that they can't possibly read and understand. And I invite anyone who wants to read that decision. Again, I'm not saying how I would rule if the issue were to come back. I'm just inviting you to read the decision for yourself and think about whether it inspires confidence in you in what the court is doing and what's happening with your elections.
I'll try to put the link to it in your at the end of your video so people can have the opportunity to read it.
Thank you.
They need to read these things. Yeah, the judicial branch is kind of supposed to keep the other two in their lane.
That's right. And I think that's really the challenge for our times is I think the people are seeing and are more concerned than ever that all of these political actors are getting outside of their lane. The legislature is there to push and pull and fight with each other and make these laws. The executive branch is there to enforce them. They don't get to make their own laws. We don't have presidents saying, I don't like our current immigration law, so I'm just not going to enforce the ones we have, and we're going to turn the country into a boiling crisis. Judges don't make law. They should not be the lawyers in a case and the judges in the case at the same time. As I said, the court's got other problems. The last couple of years, they've developed this habit, which I think is very disturbing, of reaching out into criminal cases that no one has brought to them. just deciding for their own initiative that they're going to grab a case and they're going to grant a petition to review a case that nobody's filed before them. Then the state has to come up and start defending it. And then they back up sometimes, they're creating a mess. And at the same time, they're pulling all this power to themselves in the judiciary and claiming the responsibility of the judiciary. You have to ask yourself, who's watching over the judges then? In Harris County, judges aren't trying murder cases. The legislature had to pass a bill telling Harris County to prioritize murder cases. Right now, in 2024, Harris County is trying murder cases from 2016. That's a real problem.
Yeah, that's just appalling. So why do these judges want this power? I mean, I don't understand why they would want that.
I think that's a critical question. Everybody by their nature, and the founders of the Constitution, our founding fathers, understood that human nature gravitates toward power. And what's supposed to be happening here is these branches stay separate and respectful of each other. And the more power one cedes to the other, the more dangerous the territory is becoming. In Texas, we have this challenge of we elect our judges, but too many people don't know who they are. And we don't pay attention to the courts because we assume we're all busy in our lives that we can just be confident that the people are competent and they're fair and they're doing the job. As I say, this Court of Criminal Appeals, it's not just reaching out and deciding cases no one asked them to look at, while also watching Rome burn beneath them in terms of district attorneys' offices who they say are under their watch are deciding to make their own laws. Legislatures having to step in and fix that. Murder cases aren't being tried. The other problem is, in my view, not really doing the work. When I first came out of law school, and I was fortunate enough to go to Baylor and surprised to graduate first in my class, I left and became a law clerk to the chief judge of the federal Fifth Circuit. That's the 3 states that include Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. I watched him run a court. I know what a presiding judge should do, and I've seen it done. This court now has a number of people on it. My opponent, who is the current chief on the court, or I should say the presiding judge, has been there since 1994. That court is not putting out work. It is a quarter as productive as that Fifth Circuit that I saw. When I was there, I saw my judge pull cases away from other judges because they weren't getting the work done. And to give you an example, you can find this online if you'd like. The year 2022 data will show you that court was hearing very few cases and deciding very few cases apart from writs, which are, there's a large volume of them, there's not a lot of work. And there's an important point I'm going to make here in a second. One of the judges on that court wrote 11 opinions over the course of the year. The federal court that does the same work that I worked on, they're doing 150 apiece. The judge who wrote 11 opinions, 2 weeks ago, the court put out 5 opinions. 3 of them were from 2019 and 2020. That judge who did 11 opinions, he wrote an opinion, 5 years in the waiting. Here was the issue. Does a Texas evading arrest statute require the person to know that their arrest was lawful? In other words, that the police officer had probable cause. The court says there's 2 constructions of the statute. One is absurd, one is not. We picked the one that's not absurd. It took 5 years to get that out. That judge had written 11 opinions in the year before. And here's the reason I'm telling you that. In Harris County, biggest county in the state, they have not been indicting evading arrest cases because they don't know where the court's going to go with that. They've been waiting for 5 years for that to be decided. People are fleeing the police at high speed on our highways. They get arrested, and the cases go nowhere. I've never fled the police in high speed through a crowded urban area. I'm guessing the people who do that are the same kind of people who commit other very serious crimes. I would like to know how many of them and were not prosecuted because this case was sitting there, because the court is working at its own pace, at its own leisure, actually committed murders or other offenses that would have been avoided had the job actually gotten done.
So these people are just out roaming wherever.
That's my guess. I don't know what they're doing. They could answer that. I've asked my opponent about that this morning. Her answer was, well, we like to be collegial. I can't tell them to do their job. I think that's a concern. The question then is, who is presiding?
Yeah, you're kind of in charge, right?
Somebody needs to be.
Yeah, you got to have somebody making sure the work's getting done. That's kind of the point of a presiding officer.
The point
is,
it's not our court, right? It's the people's court.
Mm-hmm.
It belongs to them, and it's not a country club. It's not a retirement home, and the work needs to get done. And the work is very serious, and it needs to be done fairly and competently. And if we can't trust them to get it done, and if we can't trust them when they do get it done, to have people at the end of the day think, I can understand how they got there. And if they get a jack-in-the-box opinion that they don't understand, that makes them not trust their elections, we're really lost.
Yeah, it's, and of course, what we try to do is, our party, is we try to inform the voters and make them understand how important every single race on that ballot is. Every position is there for a reason. So they need to be informed and pay attention to it. But how do these people, they get on the Criminal Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, nobody knows who they are, and I think people are just randomly picking somebody because they don't, it's a statewide race. It costs so much to run a statewide race that it really doesn't get run, right? So people are randomly choosing. Do you think that's part of the problem?
Oh, I think that's a big part of the problem. I think that a lot of people go to vote. It's understandable. They're busy with their lives. They've got children, they've got jobs, they've got bills to pay, and they know who the president is. Most of them know who the governor is, but you get below that level and they struggle to understand what's happening. And I think it's vitally important that people connect up with a trusted source of information and inform themselves before they go down to the ballot box and say, okay, what am I voting on? And if it was important enough in the Constitution to give you the right to vote, you should understand that it's important enough to select somebody that's not going to make the situation worse.
Yeah, and what I try to tell voters is, if you don't know anybody in the race, skip it. Do not vote if you don't know who to vote for, because then you're disenfranchising the people that do.
Well, I will tell you an interesting story like that. Well, I was Deputy Attorney General for 2 years. I ran our defense redistricting in that cycle. It was the last time we had to prove ourselves into our ability to run our own maps when Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was still in place. And we had a lot of challenges in that cycle. But coming out of that, with my first election for the court I sat on for 8 years, and we had removed the petition requirement for people to appear on the ballot. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you'll recall that. So a gentleman with a very similar name to mine, who happened to be a very liberal Democrat, filed to run against me in the Republican primary. Now, to his credit, he left open his Facebook page for me, in which he proclaimed Ronald Reagan to be a war criminal, advocated for abortion on demand through the third trimester, and gun control. So I was pushing that as hard as I could to the 4 million people who live in my district. I ran all over those 6 counties: Dallas, Collin, Grayson, Hunt, Kaufman, Rockwall. And most people don't understand how the ballot order works either. It's random in each county. It's basically a coin toss. Well, I lost the ballot coin toss in 5 out of 6 counties. And this gentleman didn't come out to a single debate. He didn't spend a nickel on a single yard sign. So it became a perfect test case for ballot order. So here I am, second in the ballot, 5 out of 6 counties, first in 1. I got 75% of the vote in the county I was first in. The other 5, within a percent of each other, 62%. So I can assure you no Republican primary voter consciously was voting for the person who hated Ronald Reagan. So that tells you about 13% of the voters who turn out are picking the first name that they see.
Yep. I believe that. Yeah. Well, it's just a slow process to try to educate the voter, and that's what I'm trying to get through to the Republican Party, is that we've got to have a system where we educate and that was in the Republican primary.
Mm-hmm.
We have to educate these primary voters to not guess and to be informed.
Well, there's some basic things that people should be asking anybody who's running for public office is, have you been voting? What primary have you been voting in?
Exactly.
Have you contributed money? Where have you contributed money? These will tell you a lot. You'd be surprised how many people are running and winning races who are not Republicans.
Oh.
Let alone conservatives.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot.
And then worse is whether they're qualified or not. I mean, I don't mean to be casting stones, but this Court of Criminal Appeals that I'm running for, nobody is, I believe this is correct, no one who's currently serving on that court had been any kind of an appellate court judge prior to getting onto that court. And as I say, they've been working slowly and putting out opinions of whatever quality at low volume for quite a long time. And you may have seen that recently we had this constitutional amendment election. Mm-hmm. There was a question on that ballot about whether judges could continue to serve after the existing mandatory retirement. We don't want these courts already looking like rest homes. The voters were very, very clear that they want judges who are actually working, and I think that's critical, who are doing the job, who are not doing more harm than good. And with respect to that age issue, they overwhelmingly rejected it. 2 out of the 3 people running for re-election on this ballot can't serve the term. Constitutionally, they will have to leave and vacate the term. I don't believe we should have people running for elective office who can't serve the elective office.
Yeah, they should have put in there. They should have put, if you turn, was it 75?
75, yeah.
During your final term, that should count you out as being able to run.
Well, we've already held the opposite. We won't let you turn 35 a week after the date the office begins. We don't accept partially vacant terms.
Right.
So it seems pretty obvious to me, and I think we ought to look at that in the next legislative session.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, because then the voters don't have the opportunity to choose their replacement, because people think, well, maybe we have a good governor. He'll surely appoint a good judge. But what if he's not the governor?
That's correct. I think we're probably going to see a Republican administration in Washington. I certainly hope we do this coming election. And as I said, I ran our defense for redistricting for the state. The way it works is the party in power in the first midterm always struggles. And I don't know who will be on the ballot for governor in 2026. But if Matthew McConaughey is running for governor against a new candidate coming from the Republican Party, the idea that we would have our highest criminal judge in the state appointed by a Democrat should be a frightening prospect. It's already enough of a challenge with ostensible Republicans sitting in that seat, handing out victories. Another example of a real obvious concern is I'm getting calls from criminal defense lawyers and from DAs across the state concerned about what this court's doing. Here's another example. The criminal defendant gets to appeal up to the court. The court looks at the briefs and says, no, you don't have any winning arguments, but we found one for you. And I'm going to raise this myself. And by the way, I agree with myself. So I think the criminal defendant wins. And the state raises its hand and says, well, wait a second. We didn't have any chance to respond to your argument. We'd like to be heard. No. I mean, that's the worst kind of activism. For a judge, you can't be both the judge and the lawyer for one side, make the argument and agree with yourself and say to the criminal, you've won. Congratulations. I know you didn't argue this, but I argued it for you, and I'm not going to let the other side be heard. This is the highest court in the state. And in my view, they've lost their way. This is not conservative. This is not even rule of law based. This is just my way at my pace. And it's a real problem.
So they've gone woke effectively.
They've certainly gone rogue.
Rogue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just sounds like incompetence.
It's a real concern. The good news, if there is good news about that Stevens opinion, is it's got people looking at what this court is and what it does and who is on it and how long they've been there and what they've been doing or haven't been doing. And that's healthy. And I think they should study the race. They should look at these candidates. Can you serve the term? What does your record say about how fair you are? I invite people to look at my record. I've been on a big appellate court for 8 years. I have a record on election security matters. You should look at that. I have a record on life issues. You should look at that. I have a record on gender issues. You should look at that. And I'm not saying I am dispensing my own brand of justice. All I'm saying is, look, as the world goes down a path that's departing from the rule of law, do we have judges that are going to stand with it? Look at this court. Have the judges ever been sanctioned for misconduct? Have the judges ever been fined by the Ethics Commission? Have the judges gotten into other trouble? This is the highest court in the state. People should know these things.
So if you get elected, what is the first thing you'd probably do as presiding judge?
I think the first thing I'm going to do is meet with my remaining colleagues, and I'm going to ask them what their intentions are. Do we want to get this court moving in a healthy, productive direction? Are we going to be open? Are we going to be transparent? Are we going to stop reaching out and deciding cases no one's asked us to hear? Are we going to start exercising some leadership? And I'm going to look for an answer. They don't have to give me the answer I want, but if they don't give me the answer that I think is correct, I am going to move forward in the direction I think is correct. And if they're right, that's not going to be embarrassing or painful for them. But if they aren't right, it's going to be embarrassing and it's going to be painful, as it should be.
Yep. Yeah, they're here for us.
Correct.
So is it that you think it's because they just don't have enough to do that they're doing all this stuff? Are they not getting enough cases up to them?
I think this is one of the reasons a lot of people favor term limits. I'm not going to state a position on that one way or another, but after you've been doing something for a while, you get comfortable with it's the way we do things and my way. And being pushed or challenged is very uncomfortable for people like that. And I don't know if it's true of all of them, but it certainly has gotten to the point where they're accumulating power to themselves in terms of these decisions on what are supposed to be separations of power. It's not aggregation of power, it's separation of power. And they're moving slower. They're getting more progressive with respect to their attitudes towards reaching into cases, making the state respond. For instance, there was a case I think it was 2 weeks ago. As I said, Harris County is now massively behind. They're on 2016 murder cases are just now going to trial. They don't have a limitless supply of money. So when you've got a capital murder case with potential death penalty involved, you got to take that really seriously. So you get expert witnesses, you get people subpoenaed, you get ready for trial. Okay, so the Court of Criminal Appeals, the week before that trial, without telling the state or inviting them to even respond, just stops the trial because the plaintiffs, or I'm sorry, the defense lawyer had filed a brief with them 6 months before and said, I thought that the police officer said I would be exempt from prosecution if I confessed to the crime. Now, I don't think you have to be a lawyer to think, can a police officer make that kind of, that's not a difficult question. But the court just out of the blue stopped the trial and said, we want to look at that. Then, of course, I don't know what their real intent, what their intentions were there, but they stopped the trial. A week later, they said, well, gosh, obviously there's nothing to see here. Reset that trial for, I don't know, 2025, whatever else it is. I mean, we don't have time for this. What the explanations are for it is, at this point, kind of irrelevant. You're not doing the job.
Well,
And to the extent you are, you're messing it up. So just stop. Frankly, if you all just quit, we'd be better off.
Well, save the taxpayers some money, I guess, too.
That's sort of the point.
Yeah. Yeah, justice delayed is justice denied.
That is
right?
correct. And we can't have, it's like we have two states. I mean, in our big cities, we have a totally different system than we do in our rural areas. And I think part of that gets to your point about, do the people know who they're putting in these benches? In Sweetwater, Texas, I can guarantee you the people know who their judges are, and they do not suffer fools, and they will not put the dumbest guy in town on the bench. In bigger urban areas, it's a real challenge. People's ballot is very long, and they don't have trusted sources of information.
Yeah, I mean, the ballot in Houston has, what, 80-some judge races or something?
Yeah, they don't know who those people
so
are.
So they're just randomly picking their...
And that's why the challenge at the top is even more important. Those judges, and the word presiding judge has to mean something. If you can't get your colleagues to respect you and say, look, judge, it's been a year. This is an important case. There's 30 million people out there who are worried about crime, who are worried about fairness and the rule of law. I don't know what you're doing, but we can't wait for year 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. When I was chairing the conduct commission, we had judges, sitting for a year or more on an opinion, and there are rules about that, ethical rules, and we sanctioned them, saying you're violating that. And I pointed that out to the current presiding judge today. I said, well, what are you doing? You have the obligation, that judge who's sitting there for 5 years, you should be standing in his doorway, tapping your foot with your arms crossed, saying, it's year 2 now. When are you going to get this done? You have an ethical obligation to complete your work in a reasonably timely basis, and you're already past that. And I have a responsibility as presiding judge to tell you that you need to get this done. And if you don't do it by year 3, I have obligations to take action about that. And her answer is, well, we like collegiality.
Collegiality. That's crazy. Well, maybe they need to start paying them based on the cases instead of the salary.
Or we should just keep track of, who's being productive and who isn't.
Yeah.
And I just think it's healthy for people to pay attention to the behavior of their judges, to the quality of their work, and the results that they're putting out. And, as I said, I worked for that. I worked for a really good, obviously very good judge, sat over a big federal court for a year and got to watch him preside as I think a judge should preside. And I'll never forget some of the lessons I learned from him about writing opinions, deciding cases. And one of them was, if you're writing an opinion for me and the result seems totally stupid, stop. Just stop. That you missed something early, because the law's not crazy. It's just not crazy. There's something there basic that you missed. And I think people who haven't done work at a high level sort of sometimes miss that. So some of these opinions that come out and they look goofy, there's something very basic at the beginning that they just missed. And that's just a competence question. Mm-hmm. And you hope that when judges are making mistakes, that's what it is. People aren't perfect. Nobody is. Judges make mistakes too. But you got to be able to do the job. And if it's worse than that and it's something else, then we really have a problem.
Yeah, but you can go back and reread it and proof it and check it and redo it and make sure it's right before you issue it.
Well, and you've got 8 colleagues there to watch you. And when one of them peels off and says, look, here, you've done this wrong. It's time to slow down.
Yeah, I mean, it's set up a certain way for a reason.
That is correct. That's why, as you go up the system, there's more and more judges. It's more eyes and more challenges. And when one of your colleagues says, I think you've got it wrong, you got to slow down and listen to them. Mm-hmm. And if you think they've got it incorrect, that's the colleague who's disagreeing with, that's fine. Respond to them. But you can't just put your fingers in your ears and to say, my way. And that's a real problem.
Yeah. Well, I guess the problem is not only the lack of knowledge on the part of the voters on who to vote for on these judge races, but then you have foreign outfits coming in dumping tons of money into these races and smothering the voice of some of these candidates, right?
Yeah, that's an issue I have been writing on and expressing concern about for 15 or 20 years. We have elected judges, and I think that's the best system we could possibly have because it gives the opportunity. It doesn't assure it, but it gives the opportunity for meaningful accountability for the work that the judges are doing. But in order to make that really work, people have to be paying attention. And if they're not paying attention and somebody throws money at them in terms of television ads or mailers and things of that nature, they can be beguiled pretty quickly. And the challenge we have is that we are not effectively regulating the way money comes into judicial elections. I've been saying for years, you ought not be able to give money to a judge who is currently looking at your case. I've never heard anyone disagree with me about that.
No, I don't think 95% of the voters have no clue that that's the case, that can happen.
And it can happen in Texas. And a judge can reach out directly to you and ask you for money. And it doesn't have to be disclosed to the other side directly, even when a case is going on like at this second. The idea that a judge can take money from somebody who's going to appear before him tomorrow is a real problem. If that's ever going to happen, the first thing that should happen is the person giving the money should have to tell the people on the other side of their case and say, hey,
well, at the very least,
at a minimum. And then there should be a rule about after a certain amount of money, and you can pick a number, the judge should have to step aside. That's it. The argument is always, well, I'm not trying to buy a judge. I just want a real good judge, a quality judge to hear my cases and somebody's cases. Well, that's fine. You give him money, he just won't hear the case you have in front of him now. Then they're, whoa, wait a second, I'm not sure I want to give the money anymore.
Yeah, they're getting a lot less money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just absolutely. I didn't know that until
most people don't. And as I said, I've never heard anyone say they want to take the other side of that argument. And I've been saying this for 15 years or so. It's very simple to fix this.
Yeah.
The courts can do it themselves. They don't need the legislature to do it. The courts write their own ethics rules. They write their own rules of civil procedure. In 15 minutes, I could write a rule that says the first time a lawyer appears in a case, if he's given money to the judge in the last 2 years, he should tell the other side how much he's given.
Right.
Right. Just like that. And then the judge could be that we could write a rule of judicial conduct for if the judge receives money while a case is pending, he has to step aside. That's simple. Mm-hmm. We haven't done it.
So if you don't like your judge, just write him a check.
Yeah. Well, that's a real problem. That's a real problem.
Then that gets
I give the judge a little period of time to reject it. How about that?
Right. There you go. Yeah. Nothing's ever quite as easy and straightforward as you would think.
Yeah.
No, it's fascinating. I think just most people aren't unless they're an attorney or something. They never, hopefully, they never get in the justice system, so they don't understand that the Supreme Court's bifurcated, with a civil and a criminal. Mm-hmm. And I've had several people running for judge, like district judge, and I let them explain to the voters how the system's set up. So it's pretty fascinating. So somebody's really thought this through.
I wrote a couple articles about this a long time ago about we've got sort of a crazy quilt system in Texas. We've got, in some counties, you've got district courts and county courts at law, and other courts you've got other counties you've got family courts, and it's more than anyone can possibly keep track of. And at some point, somebody needs to sit down with a pen and just make it make sense. I don't think we're there right now, but it's hard enough for the judges, the lawyers to keep track of. I can guarantee you the public's got better things to do than keep track of what's the difference between a constitutional county court and a county court at law and the district court and the people's court with Judge Wapner. They don't know the difference. They have better things to worry about.
Sure. So the main reason you're running for the presiding judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals is because we need leadership and competency back in the court.
You got it. And somebody that can get the work done.
And move cases along.
Move cases along and produce predictable results consistent with the Constitution, consistent with the statutes, and in a way that people can pick up the opinions, read them, and say, that makes sense. I may not agree with it, but at least I understand how we got there. And a number of these decisions have caused people to scratch their heads. And I want to be careful to not tell you how I would be inclined to vote in any one of them, but I can tell you that the work product that we're seeing out of a lot of the court is not inspiring confidence. The fairness of some of these proceedings is shocking, and has caused the court to get into trouble nationally and internationally in some of these cases for the way it's treating people, and it all needs to be fixed.
So we need change.
We do need change. And it's not just me saying it. I mean, there's a reason I picked this race and a reason I picked this particular candidate to run on. My best friend ran this race 6 years ago. I invite people to go look at the press coverage on that race. He was tragically killed in a wrong way car accident. But he served on my court for 23 years, and he did a wonderful job there. And he came that close to winning that race. And he didn't have the funding. Very few people knew who the courts were. And at that time, nobody was paying attention. I think, as I say, that Stevens opinion has got people focused on that court. And I think, again, not getting into the merits of how I would rule on it, I think it's very healthy that people are starting to pay attention.
Yep.
And I urge them to look at the court, look at what it's doing in terms of reaching out to cases it's not in, while at the same time not leading in terms of what's going on in those lower courts, what's going on with those district attorneys' offices, all of which are under the judicial branch, and sort of watching Rome burn as it does. One more example I want to give you is, I don't know if you've heard about this, but Harris County, the biggest county in the state, no one knows how many cases that were major criminal cases, appealed out of their trial courts up to the Court of Criminal Appeals that are lost. Some of them from the 90s, some of them from the 2000s. Nobody knows.
Just lost the whole files.
This is the 21st century. The idea that the top of the judicial branch doesn't know where the cases went is hard to understand. That issue came up to this court again, or I shouldn't say again. That case came up to this court, like many of these other issues, and once again, in a staggering lack of leadership, the issue was, should this court grab a hold of that problem and bring the clerk up here and say, how many cases are there? What happened to them? How are we going to fix this? How are we going to make sure it never happens again? The majority of the court, the presiding judge among them, said, no, we're not going to do that. Let's just send it back to the lower courts and let them try to figure this out for us. To their credit, a couple of the younger judges on the court said, no, this is embarrassing for the state. We've got to show some leadership here. We got to take this on right now. But not enough to make the change.
That's appalling.
It's embarrassing is what it is.
Yeah. That's incompetence.
It's terrible.
So we got a real problem. So do you have a website people can go to learn more about you?
I do. It's www.Schenck for Texas, SCHENCK for Texas. I am David Schenck. I am a conservative. I am a judge with a real record. I have proudly served the people of Texas as an appellate court judge, as a chairman of your conduct commission, as deputy attorney general. I have a record on important issues to you, and I haven't said what I should have. if you remember the Heller case in the U.S. Supreme Court on the Second Amendment, I was there. I wrote the brief for the Texas State Rifle Association and 42 other state associations. And I stand with the Constitution. I stand up for the people of this country, and I will follow the law. And I make that promise to you, and I promise you I'll show up at the office. I'll get the job done. You may not agree with me, but I'll tell you what, I'm working for you, and I don't owe a thing to anybody else other than you.
Very good. Well, we really appreciate you coming to talk to us today, and good luck out there on the campaign trail, and be safe.
Thank you. God bless you. I appreciate it very much.